got the power. I've got the power in me. I've got the power. I've got the power in me.
What's up, LinkedIn? What's up, Facebook? And what is up, YouTube? I'm Matt Medinka, head of marketing for Protec. With me is my friend Tom Sandry, who's also my colleague and director of training resource for Protec and longtime industry veteran. Today for Power Hour, we are hosting the Shermco Safety Corner. This is going to be one of many. I'd like to introduce our guest, Jeremy Presnell, Vice President, EHS and Workforce Development for Shermco Industries. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Tom. Really appreciate you having me, and certainly the opportunity to collaborate here and talk about a topic very near and dear to my heart. So I think we're going to have a great conversation for everybody.
So our topic today, obviously on the screen there, is hazardous energy control, common pitfalls, and how to mitigate. Before we get going, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about Shermco and what you do for Shermco?
Sure. Well, Shermco is a leading electrical services company. Been around for many, many years, and has over 50 offices across the U.S. and Canada. I've been at Shermco for 2 years and 9 months. I lead the EHS and workforce development teams, but I've been involved in industry for over 20 years, particularly in the utilities arena. I've also worked in oil and gas and construction, as well as heavy manufacturing. And I'm very active within ASSP. I lead the Utilities Practice Specialty Group, as well as the IEEE Electric Safety Workshop Occupational Safety and Health Committee. So I help co-chair that with Renee Graves and work with a group of a lot of great people, very like-minded, in the effort to prevent significant incident and fatal injuries to the workforce. So it's kind of a lot in a nutshell, but again, just happy to be here and have this discussion today.
Sure. Great. We're happy to have you. Shermco is obviously a good friend, customer, and partner, a longtime partner with Protec, and so we're happy to have you on. Speaking of which, Tom, I know most people on here are going to know you, but why don't you introduce yourself just in case we have people who don't know who you are, which I can't believe that's anybody, but
yeah.
Let us know what you're doing for Protec now. Now, you came from Shermco,
yes.
Had a stint at Protec, and then you spent a long time at Shermco, and now you're back at Protec.
In the electrical industry now. Oh, God, I always hate dating myself, but going on over 35 years, working both for utility companies. For a good middle part of my career, I actually worked for a major test and measurement manufacturer. Worked a little bit in design engineering and then application support. Worked 10 odd years for Shermco in their workforce development department and environmental health and safety. And that's where Jeremy and I not only became colleagues, but became very, very good friends because we just share very common philosophies on the approach to training, the importance of safety, the need to make sure that all of our workers come home safe at the end of their shifts. So I'm just absolutely delighted that we have Jeremy here today because just over the years working with him and collaborating with him, I've just built a tremendous amount of respect for the man.
Great. And so I think, to tee this up, we're going to have slideshow and it's kind of presentation format, but we're going to talk about, give a lot of color with all those slides. So you're going to get the visual and you're going to get the color as well. But to tee this up, like Jeremy, you presented this at Needed Power Test recently, but I think you ran short on time. And so there's some beef in there that you didn't quite get to in the presentation because you started late and didn't get through it. So this is kind of our opportunity to get through it again, because I know Tom was like, I want to see this. So we're having you on here to do it again. So I think this is going to be really, really valuable for everybody to watch and stay tuned to. So We're expecting about a 45-minute presentation. Then we're going to have some Q&A at the end. If anybody, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, you're welcome to put a comment. We'll get the comments and we'll actually respond to them pretty close to real time here. So if you have any comments or questions, just post them and we'll field them as they go. So without further ado, let's move to that view. And there we go. So I'm just going to shut up and let you guys go.
All right, Matt. Well, thank you. Well, excuse me. For today's talking points, a couple of key areas that we really want to make sure that we address for the audience. In one area, Jeremy's going to take us in and will help illustrate a case for change and improvement, particularly related to the control of hazardous energies. We're going to be reviewing regulatory compliance standards and highlighting the common pitfalls and the challenges that we all face in this industry. From there, we're going to go into communicating the processes, the tools, and the practices to mitigate the risk. And then we'll close out with a discussion on practical scenarios and applications. Now, I think, Jeremy, when I first caught this presentation at Power Test, Jeremy, you did a really wonderful job of presenting a case for change in the industry. So if you don't mind, can you take us through some of the stats, and I'll kind of advance us to one of the 2019 slides.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to touch on facts and figures first, just to kind of set the tone, as well as we'll weave in some personal experiences and thoughts, and ultimately by the time we get through the presentation, I think we will have articulated really why at Shermco, and you were certainly part of leading this project, Tom, but why we decided to make the change that we did to help certainly our workforce, but also helping our customers and other contractors on site. So you can see here, this is data from ESFI. They put out great information every year. They do a fantastic job of breaking down significant incident and fatality cases across the U.S. They pull the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so 2019, there were 166 fatalities. And when you look over on the left side of the chart, you see in 2011, there were 174. It certainly gives me the feeling that we've not made enough progress in industry. And certainly that alone, to me, is a case for change. But when you think about 166 people, that's almost the size of a medium aircraft, that we all travel on regularly. And you think about just that's about 3 people per week, per the work week. And, the electrical injuries are just absolutely life altering. And arc flash incidents happen every day. Shock events happen every day. There's on average about 2,000 electrical injuries every year. That includes both non-disabling and disabling injuries in the United States, with many of those requiring pretty long-term treatment and recovery at burn centers. I think I already mentioned it. I mean, it's pretty much average 3 people per week are killed from electrical energy. OSHA estimates approximately 2 people per week are killed specifically as a result of failing to control hazardous energy, and electrical is probably the primary source that most of our team members are exposed to, but there's a lot of other type of energy sources that are a risk factor to our employees. And electric shock, I believe, is still the 4th or 5th leading cause of traumatic occupational fatalities. So the next slide, I think it gives a little more color specific to the type of industries and the fatality rate of the occupations involved. Construction / extraction, Industries leads the way in fatalities, but it's followed by installation, maintenance, and repair, which involves a whole lot of electrical testing, right? And you think about in 2019, also, it highlights the construction industry leads the way with the highest electrical fatal injury rate, followed by the utility workers. And,
Wow.
what I learned at a meeting here a couple years ago, IEEE was chairing. But essentially, in the last 20 years, 50% of the electrical fatalities that happen are really coming out of the construction industry as well. So, certainly alarming, certainly, and there's other stats that I think are important to highlight. If you can go to the next slide here, the information that was put out for 2020, you can see there were still 126 fatal electrical injuries. And we talked about 2019. There was about a 24% decrease from the prior year, but so less fatalities, but there was a 17% increase over 2019 in significant injuries, so incidents involving days away from work. And I think we're all probably pretty well aware of the curveball that happened in 2020 that probably played a factor in reducing or impacting the number of fatalities, because construction trade, right? A lot of construction jobs were shut down.
I was going to comment that the significant drop, and again, when you're still looking at 126 people, in my mind, it's still not significant. But when we're seeing this drop from 166 to 126, can we really pat ourselves on the back, or really was it the pandemic? A lot of the jobs falling into delay and less work going on out there. So the pandemic saved lives, maybe, but based on those from 2011 up through 2019, again, I think it still strikes your overall message that there needs to be change. We're not dropping those numbers significantly.
Right.
Well, they're really all preventable, right? Like there's nothing that's not preventable. And Smokey, who's watching live, he give an interesting perspective. It's interesting to see that the low peaks on the fatality graph almost run parallel with the high peaks on the injury graph. Yeah. So, I mean, there's some correlation there. And for as much as it dropped in 2020, I'm really interested in see what the numbers are in 2021, 2022, as we've come out of COVID and the jobs are just coming in, lickety split now. How high that number actually goes, for the fact that A, there's just more work, we're playing catch up, and B, when we're doing that can cause some carelessness as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I've had some interesting conversations with folks about that very fact. There were just less people at work in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Matter of fact, I think it was at least hours work decreased by 10%. But you think about it, the people that were at work, they still had to get the same amount of work done, right? And that's why I think you may see the increase in the lost time. The employees that were at work, the severe cases increased. And so this slide here just gives you another good visual aid around occupations involved in electrical fatalities. The thing that I find most concerning is a third of the electrical injuries occurred in the installation, maintenance, and repair occupations, and 65% of injuries occurred in service providing organizations. And another interesting fact, about 2/3 of the employees injured had been working for their employer at least 1 or more years. So it wasn't exactly just the the newbies on the job that are getting hurt, which to me that's encouraging to hear that, I think there's a higher awareness and guard out for newer employees. But
Yeah, it does speak though for us older veterans, because I know there was a period of time in my own, here's confession time, in my own personal life where I was getting very complacent. I was doing the work very often, very familiar. I was almost, for a period of time going on, robotic pilot, just kind of going through the motions. And the one thing that I will say that helped snap me out of it and give me a sanity check was when I started getting a lot of new hires and young technicians on the crews. Because the one thing I love about the new hire is particularly those that have a questioning attitude, constantly asking me questions. Well, why are we doing it this way? Why are you? And that in itself helped snap me out of complacency, got me thinking again about the job, thinking about the planning that needed to go into the job or before the job started. So there is a danger out there that I'll just say for all of us old guys that, have been doing this work for a long time. Self-discipline. Don't let yourself get complacent. Don't let yourself get comfortable, and particularly don't push those young guys off to the side or tell them to be quiet. Their questions and their challenges, help keep us thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when you think about from a human performance perspective, and, I think overconfidence is certainly in the top 10 factors that lead to significant incident and fatalities. And so in an industry where you have such highly intelligent and technically capable employees, I think we just have to be more mindful of that risk and just
Right.
a little more vigilant. So,
And talking of risks and everything, let's go into our favorite, the hierarchy of risk control methods itself. What we should be using as the core of all of our planning.
absolutely. So I'm, from a significant incident and fatality perspective, and I'm probably just going to use the word SIF or the term SIF moving forward in the presentation. The hierarchy of risk control methods has proven effective in reducing the likelihood and just in general the rate of those type of injuries. You'll see here on this slide, and actually 70E adopted this several years ago, and a lot of the other national safety standards have adopted the hierarchy of controls. But the top of the pyramid starts with elimination, right? And certainly that is the most effective, and followed by substitution, engineering controls, and so forth. And Tom, I think you've probably seen it a lot in industry when people are they're in the throes of it and they're to get the work done. It's almost immediately diving into the administrative controls and the PPE and can you maybe touch on just the importance to evaluate opportunities to search at the higher level of the pyramid?
Now you're spot on with that. In one of my observations, working on job sites and being part of the EHS team, going out there and auditing some of the job hazard analysis or activity hazardous analysis, pre-job plannings, I had noticed that there is a lot of tendency sometimes. The crew will go up, and if there's an arc flash label present, they'll kind of review on the arc flash label. They'll go straight into, well, what administrative controls do I have at my company, and what level of PPE do I need to don? And I was always kind of correct them a little bit and say, well, hold on a second. Let's really exercise and use risk control the way it is intended. You're putting your greatest effort right into that PPE. But did you know that it is the bottom of the hierarchy?
Right.
It is there when everything else in your safety plan went wrong.
That's right.
So what can we do to, not need PPE? For instance, hey, if we start at the top of the pyramid, can we eliminate the danger? Can we eliminate the energy? If we de-energize the circuit, there is no shock, there is no arc flash, there is no arc blast. I don't even need, an arc flash suit or electrical protection. I've eliminated that hazard. If we're racking a breaker on a live bus, can I use a substitution? Can I do remote racking as opposed to local racking? Again, if I'm outside of the arc flash boundary operating the remote racking tool, I don't need PPE there. Now, if a mistake is made, an arc flash can still be produced, but only the equipment is going to take it.
Right.
The human life is not in jeopardy at that point. So I would always stress with the technicians, don't just jump into your PPE and your administrative controls. Think about the risk. Think about your task, how you're going to execute, and work it from the top of the pyramid on down. That's going to give you your best risk control plan.
Absolutely. No, that's well said. I mean, really, and you probably heard it said before, but PPE is the last line of defense. And, when you think about it from a human performance perspective, or some call it the bow tie model, where you got your prevention controls and you got your recovery controls, right? The PPE is a recovery control when everything else failed. The incident still occurred, but we do have a control in place with the appropriate protection factors to ensure that person's still going to go home at the end of the day. So,
and you touched on a really, really good phrase, and I'm going to kind of throw it out to our audience right now. Please feel free to chime in on the chat here. But here we see the pyramid. We see at the top elimination, and we also see it correlates to most effective risk control method. We look at the bottom of the pyramid, we see PPE, and it's in the category of least effective risk control methods. So here's the question I put out to our audience. Why is elimination, substitution, and engineering controls considered to be the most effective methods of controlling hazards? And awareness, administrative controls, and PPE being viewed as less effective? Chime on into the chat. We'll give you just a brief moment to hit your keyboards, and then I'll leave Jeremy answer the question for us then, because you were the one that coined that beautiful phrase that in your dialogue earlier. So
yeah, absolutely. So I can't see the chat here. Let me make sure I got the right setting. But just, from a high level perspective, the thing about administrative controls and PPE and awareness is the fact that, we are relying on our people in a lot of cases to not make a mistake, right? The layers of protection. And so when you do have to rely on an administrative control, like today's topic, hazardous energy control, has to be a very clear and robust process to ensure that we're looking out for those error precursors, right? Using those human performance tools, the self-check, the peer check, the three-way communication. And I know we could do a whole topic on human performance tools, and we have
we very well may. Very well may.
That's right. But certainly, I think you brought up some great points here. And on the next slide, I'd like to just, just keep going here from a time perspective.
Right.
I think the two of us certainly have over 50 years combined in industry, and some of the most significant injuries that I have seen have been related to electrical. And Tom, I know the same for you. And so I hope the information that we share throughout this presentation today helps folks just be able to reflect where they're at and
Right.
take some tidbits away to make improvements where they're at.
And, one of the things I do want to comment, particularly, kind of as a segue as we go into the industry needs to improve, I'm Protec Equipment, you're Shermco Industries. Depending upon who's watching in the live feed and everything, we've got numerous service companies that are out there. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what logos we're wearing on our shirts. I think one thing that we can all unite around, all the service companies can unite around, is the value of our people and ensuring that they come home safe at the end of their shift. So these discussions are transparent, open, and for the betterment of all of our brothers in the industry.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Well said. And so let's just, and I don't want to spend too much time on the compliance side of things, but, certainly
We'll jump into compliance.
there are some requirements that I think it's important to point out here early on. When we hear the word compliance, most of us think of OSHA, whether we're in general industry or construction or maritime. But there's actually a lot of standards that can apply from a federal standpoint when you're talking about the control of hazardous energy, and particularly when you're trying to mitigate the hazards of electrical shock and or arc flash, right? So there's really kind of I would say the big three specifically from a general industry perspective. Hazardous energy control 1910-147, but of course there's subpart R, the special industries 1910-269, electrical power generation, transmission, distribution, and then OSHA has the entire subpart S on electrical practices, and there's a lot specifically there around equipment and installations and some on safe work practices, but certainly not what you're going to get from the consensus standards. And so of course construction, same thing. You've got standards specific to lockout and electrical, and that doesn't even touch anything that could be out there from the 28 state plans that exist in OSHA across the U.S. So, but when you think about it, everybody's familiar. If you can go to the next slide, I just like to touch on the OSHA, the notorious top 10 list, right? A very interesting fact in when I was putting this presentation together with my colleague Clayton Wall, we were looking at this list, and I assumed that control of hazardous energy made it on there pretty regularly, but I was surprised to see that it makes the top 10 every year. And not only does it make the top 10, on average it's making the top 5. So certainly I think that's something that we need to keep in mind. And also, more interestingly, if you go to the next slide, I think that there's a lot of citations that are issued around specific procedures and doing periodic inspections and training and all those things. But go to the next slide real quick here. Sorry, I don't want us to run out of time. But the OSHA top 10 list also includes citations for electrical wiring methods, electrical general, again, subpart S, and machine guarding, right? Protection from equipment hazards and energy sources. And so the thought is, if OSHA included all these into one category, just around control of hazardous energy, Would it be in the top 3? Would it be maybe the top 2 or number 1? I think fall protection has probably been long-standing in number 1 or 2, but would the focus increase? Would the sense of urgency change? If we just looked at it kind of one broader category specific to controlling hazardous energy. I don't know what your thoughts are, Tom, but that's something that Clayton and I were really thinking about and discussing.
No, I'm in full agreement with you. Again, when I start to look at these breakdowns and everything, and when I was watching the presentation at Power Test and everything, it got my mind going as well, because when you really look at hazardous energy control, I mean, it covers multiple categories. So if we all lumped it into that one topic of controlling of the hazardous energies, in my mind, I think you're spot on. It's going to move up in the rankings as, this is, again, an area that needs a tremendous amount of focus.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And also, you go to the next slide here. We don't want to forget about 1910-269. It's not making the top 10 list. And although it's OSHA's utility standard, it certainly applies to more companies than just utilities. I know it's small probably for people to see on the screen, but kind of the punchline here is more than half of the citations OSHA issues under 1910-269 are for other industry classifications, such as electrical contractors, landscaping services, paper production, heavy engineering, management. I mean, they're all over the place. And basically, most heavy manufacturers fall under the distribution scope. Some even power generation, refining, for example, the paper industry. I've seen a lot of large operations that have their own internal capability from a power generation and distribution perspective. And one of the other things that's a bit unique about this standard, though, is OSHA they actually prescribe very specific requirements for the host employers and contractors regarding work coordination. And that really, the main emphasis there is around control of hazardous energy. And so, I've spent a lot of time working on both the host employer side and also working for contractor companies. And, that's an area I don't think I probably gave enough attention to in the past until I started digging into this topic and researching for the paper.
Right.
But as you mentioned, maybe that'll have to be another for us. But kind of just to wrap that up, remember, it's out there, and the standard may apply even if you're not a utility.
And one thing I do want to comment on, I like when you're talking about the host employer and the contractor, and there needs to be coordination.
Absolutely.
Because how many times the host, it's their network, it's their system, they may own the lockout tagout procedure. What is the sequence we're going to bring the system down? Where are our disconnect points and energy sources that were, but that does not alleviate the contractor coordinating, getting involved, reviewing, because again, at the end of the day, it's your personal safety. If you're the one that's doing the work, you're the one that is going to be directly exposed if something was not planned out properly. So here's where, even if the host is owning the lotto, the contractor, the qualified individual with the contractor needs to be involved, needs to review, and needs to understand and then communicate that lotto to everybody that's going to be locking onto that job.
Exactly. Absolutely. Well said. And kind of from the standpoint of that topic, I think it definitely warrants maybe a deeper dive that we can do here.
That's why we call this the beginning of the Shermco Safety Corner. You can be back many times, brother.
Absolutely, and we can definitely bring in some special guests. So the good news is I have a great network of people a lot smarter than me. So, but let's real quick just hit on. So we talked about the regulatory compliance standards. Let's hit on consensus standards real quick. And Tom, I know you're an expert in this arena. You want to give just a quick highlight on kind of the difference and how these apply?
Absolutely. Really, when you look at OSHA kind of goes out there and they define what needs to be done. Okay. Now, when you're an organization, you're putting together like your electrical safety programs, you're putting together your administrative controls and how you're going to approach training and everything. Obviously, this could be a real daunting task. Where do I start?
Yeah.
Well, the consensus standards, they really focus on how to get it done, how to do it. Okay, so OSHA kind of sets the framework and says, okay, this is what we need done. The consensus standards, now become kind of our guides on how to get it done. When we talk about training, what are the things that, the elements that we need to be looking at for training our workers? Refresher training, when is it relevant? So I think that's really the significance of when we talk about this NFPA 70E here in the U.S. Up in Canada, it's the CSA Z462,
Right.
which is their electrical safety. But even when we dig deeper, like into the National Electrical Code, which again is by the NFPA, or we look at the IEEE sponsored National Electrical Safety Code, all of these codes, all of these consensus standards, if you will, tell us how to get the job done or how to approach the areas safely. They become our guidebooks, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know just my experience, and you can go to the next slide. I would say that we have the best resources out there today than ever. I mean, there's more and more great information out there that you can leverage from these standards and being part of these industry peer groups as well. I mean, there's program examples, there's procedures and templates. I mean, you can partner with folks on how are you training your operators to be authorized or your employees to be affected, and how are you training your qualified workers on electrical safety. And when it gets into some of the specifics and what OSHA expects around periodic inspections, how are you doing those, and reviewing procedures. There's a lot of resources out there. There's some pretty comprehensive program packages that you can buy. There's a lot of third parties out there, certainly, that are experts in those areas and can help companies. And, I've personally benefited just from the great relationships I've made in industry, through, Power Test is awesome. I wish I would have found that earlier in my career, but, IEEE, I'm also still a huge fan of ASSP, both the practice specialties and also just, the value in the local chapters. So I was part of a really great local chapter in the Corpus Christi area that, does a phenomenal job on sharing information and those kind of things. And so those peer groups are fantastic. And you're probably thinking, okay, you're talking about all these wonderful things, so why are
there so many injuries?
Yeah, what's going on, right? And the reason is there are so many pitfalls and challenges. It's extremely complex, and when you're dealing in the arena of administrative controls, we already know there they're on the bottom end of effectiveness from the high
Mhm.
controls perspective, right? We're relying on humans that we know even the best are fallible to not make a mistake. And
Right.
Matt, you even mentioned something earlier around, these terrible incidents are preventable. And certainly, I agree. I think most our industry thought leaders will agree. But the key is you have to be able to predict to prevent, right? And so understanding the pitfalls and the error traps to help prevent these type of incidents, and know that, hey, something can still go wrong. And so that's where we have those additional controls, that last layer of defense, the PPE, if
Right.
something goes wrong.
Yeah,
We've
somebody
got
said that in the comments as well. Like, hey, top
Yeah,
tier. We were talking about the pyramid. Top tier is eliminating the hazard, but the bottom is preparing for the accident.
that's right. Well said. Well said. Oh, and well said by certainly a very great safety leader, Smokey Stevens. So glad to see he's participating with us today. So big shout out to him and the Valero team. That's great. That's great. So let's just real quick highlight some of the common pitfalls. I don't think that folks are going to find all of these surprising, but when you really lump them all together and think about just how much complexity our workers are dealing with and
Mhm.
trying to get this right, I think it certainly just, again, further reinforces why we need more emphasis and attention to making a change in this arena. So, next slide, please.
Okay. Well, actually, before we go off on
Yeah.
this one, some of those pitfalls, that we find under the hazardous energy control, some of the shortcomings. I know some of the ones that are near and dear to my heart, and chime in with some other ones, Jeremy. But facility equipment lacking up-to-date drawings and labels.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've got into a plant. You spent your hour doing your site-specific training at the guard shack. You get in, you got to bring power and everything down. First thing you do is say, "Hey, can you break out the one lines for me so we can identify the energy sources and the disconnect?"
Right. Right.
And how many times do you get the sad trombone? Wah, wah, wah. I
Right.
don't have any prints. The prints are out of date. It's like, I'm sorry, but I can't move forward. I can't use assumption and hope as my safety strategy.
Right.
I need to know where my lockout points are. What are the energy sources I need to control?
No,
Um,
yeah.
I think one of the other areas that you and Clayton had discovered and everything was a lot of the hazardous energy programs that were out there were just too generic in nature.
Exactly. Exactly. And not really fitting the operations and maintenance team needs. They might be a regurgitation of the OSHA standard. I've seen that. I've also, even from an electrical safety program, I've audited dozens, and I have seen many times where a company's saying their electrical safety program is NFPA 70E, and it's kind of alarming to me because the first
Right.
thought is, well, you haven't read NFPA 70E,
Right,
because
right. What does that mean?
that's right, because it gives you the elements of what the electrical safety program is, right? And it says you have to
Right.
have principles and procedures and controls. And I also think that the lack of really doing the periodic inspections the right way annually, just taking a look. Hey, are these procedures effective? Have we had any incidents? Matter of fact, if there's incidents and injuries, you're supposed to retrain. And there's a
Right.
lot of pitfalls around training too. And I know you've seen the same, where the training programs are just too generic. It's covering the regulatory language, which really isn't doing a whole lot of good for the workers that are actually doing the work. And I
Right.
think just the same thing, lack of good specific safe work practices. and procedures. Training is one piece, but truly having that individual demonstrate their proficiency,
Thank
right?
you.
When you think about the definition of a qualified worker, they're demonstrating that. And so I know we don't have time to dive heavily in that one today either, but
No, but I love where you're going, and just kind of the closing sentiment on that. Uh, Again, it kind of a shortcoming, but then introduces immediately to the opportunity. When you build a program and you put it out there, you've got to audit it. There's
that's
no
right.
sense putting something down in writing and assuming everything is working the way you believed it was going to work. You got to get out there, put boots on the ground, audit it, observe it, make sure that it's working the way you intended. The other is again, the big pitfall I see a lot of organizations with their training, they spend an enormous amount of money in training.
Yeah.
They give exams, which basically is only now measuring the student's ability that did they absorb the knowledge that you gave them in that lecture or in that classroom. But don't forget, on the job, on the day-to-day, when you're out there on the job, you need to be auditing and looking at their proficiency. Can they execute? Can they comprehend and execute? Anybody can potentially pass an exam.
Right.
It means I've absorbed the knowledge, but do I know how to use that knowledge?
That's right.
And that's where the auditing, and Jeremy, your team has always done a great job, getting out there, boots on the ground, on the job sites, and auditing, taking back, analyzing, and then making the necessary adjustments.
Yeah. And thank you, Tom, for that. And I really just think the key thing is especially in the EHS and workforce development realm. I mean, we're there to be advocates for our employees, right? And you got to be able to learn from those that are doing the work. Hey, are the tools effective? Hey, was the training effective? Because if you're observing things that cause concern, that's a really good time to try to understand, what systemic factors could be at play there, or even cultural as well. But
Right.
there's a lot of challenges on the work execution front too. I mean, you touched on equipment specific information being available and some of the challenges, between the host employer and contractor, especially if it's a new contractor, or it's a new company that the contractor's working for. Maybe it's not a new company, but it's a different site altogether in a different state.
Right.
I think the biggest thing that I've seen, and this is several companies, good companies, but where there is just, you talked about confidence earlier. I would call it too much trust in the host employer, that the host employer has this equipment in a ready for maintenance. It's in a safe working condition.
Trust
And
me.
yes, that's right. That's right. We talk about trust but verify, obviously. I think another topic that we'll talk more about in the future is emergency call outs, lone worker situations, where people, they've got to build that safety plan on the fly. And there's just a lot of challenges there. It can be hidden hazards, and it can certainly impact the ability to apply and create an electrical safe working condition. And culturally, right? Words matter when you're dealing with especially the host employer and contractor dynamics. I've heard many times, well, the customer has a process in place. Or I heard when I worked on the customer side, well, the contractor has a process in place, right? And you mentioned earlier that coordination to ensure that those processes align. And there are some challenges where you may not be able, if you're a service contractor, you may not be able to physically do the lockout on the customer's equipment. It's not uncommon in some utility scenarios, but there's still certainly a way to establish and or verify an electrical safe working condition. And I would just say,
Mhm.
one of the keys there culturally is, having a strong stop work authority program and process in
Yes.
place.
I tell you, those are some of the things that I thought were very, very powerful. With your team and with Shermco, celebrating the good catches. I mean, now you're really exciting the workers because they love to be able to be part of this. They love to go ahead and brag about the things that go right and everything. So celebrating those good catches, giving the kudos out to them for, stepping up, having that challenging attitude, and preventing something that could have gone very wrong. I always loved, in the meetings and everything with the entire workforce and everything, where we would celebrate those good catches. We would talk about them. And even in the situations, if we had an incident or whatever, the transparency of bringing it out to all of the workers, communicating, and then what were the lessons that we learned? How are we going to prevent this from ever happening again? Those are some of my fondest memories working with your team.
Well, thank you, and certainly, I think to really excel well, and to just try to take safety to the next level. It's important that your company is investing and committed to being a learning organization. You'll hear that term used a lot in the human performance or human and organizational performance or high reliability organizations. That they all are obsessed with learning, right? Because
Right.
Matt mentioned, hey, these things can be prevented, and he's absolutely right. But we have to be able to predict the things that we need to prevent, and that's where that learning forum comes into play. And certainly, I think is a best practice that I've seen companies do, and I think we do a great job here at Shermco each month with all of our leaders and all of our EHS and workforce development team. And so
Well, that actually brings us into our next really big talking point. Let's go into that practical approach and the application.
yeah,
Again, I think here you've got a really good command, and I'm not sure if you want to read this quote, on the checklist manifesto.
yeah,
But
sure.
this
Just
was a great eye opener when you first presented this to our team.
Yeah, absolutely. So, great book written by a physician. And I'm not going to, I guess, read it all verbatim, but essentially, um, he says, here then, our situation at the start of the 21st century, we've accumulated stupendous know how. We've put it in the hands of some of the most highly trained, highly skilled, and hardworking people in our society. And with it, they have indeed accomplished extraordinary things. Um, Nonetheless, that know how is often unmanageable. Avoidable failures are very common and persistent, not to mention demoralizing and frustrating across many fields, from medicine to finance to business to government. And so, and it kind of walks through. So, what really he's getting at is the volume and complexity of the work has exceeded individuals' abilities to essentially deliver the benefits correctly, safely, reliably. And knowledge has saved us, but it's also burdened us and means we need to have a different strategy for overcoming failure, and one that builds upon experiences and takes advantage of learning and the knowledge from people, and the fact that that strategy and tool is something as simple as a checklist. A lot of people, I think, are like, "What? Well, we've had checklists for years. We've got dozens of checklists. We don't want any more checklists." I've even heard some leaders share their thoughts are that, well, when people have a checklist, sometimes they turn their brain off. And so I think that there's been so much research done recently, in the arena around trying to prevent significant incidents. And, think about the type of industries that are highly reliable, right? So, would you want to put your family on a plane to go on vacation and the pilot not use his checklist, even though he's maybe flown that route for decades? He may be the best pilot on that aircraft and have the most knowledge of anyone in that entire arena.
But you nailed it right there, though, Jeremy. No matter how familiar he is with the route and everything, the checklist keeps him from being compliant, keeps him from overlooking a critical step.
That's right. That's right. And that, I mean, that's the whole, that's really where the value comes into place. Checklists do save lives. And there was a great paper at IEEE a few years ago. Daryl Crow delivered that presentation, and he gave a lot of examples and really reflected on the checklist tool and how it helped turn around the aviation industry. And think about all the work that was done in the 80s by the nuclear industry. I mean, that's really where your human performance principles came from. And so the key is having the right checklist, and the key is knowing what are the key things to look for here. And this is just an example. Tom, you were talking about this earlier. What are the most important things when it comes to hazardous energy control, right? And so if you go to the next slide, I know we've kind of ran out of time a bit here, but Tom, you were part of the team and really led a large part of the effort in this tool that we developed. You want to just kind of share your thoughts on the value?
Absolutely. Again, this was a great collaboration with, and what I loved about the collaboration, the creation of this hazardous energy control form checklist was, it wasn't just, the top level people at the team putting this together, but it was a constant back and forth with the guys in the field. So it was designed top up and bottom up, which I thought was just absolutely fantastic. But Matt, if you can just kind of zoom in full screen on the on it. I think the key elements that I really loved the way this turned out was on the very first page of the form. Here's where all of your initial job planning, goes into play. What is that maximum available fault current that we're going to be dealing with? What is the clearing time? How do I actually make those calculations and then size my grounds accordingly? Right. If I'm going to be doing the test before touch, or I'm going to be doing the switching, what is the shock risk assessment results? What are the arc flash risk assessment results? Right. From there, and here again, I love right in the beginning of the page 2, here's your little reminder of the sequence to go through. And in part A, all right, here's your switching plan. What are those sources of energy that we need to control? What is the sequence at which we're going to bring them down and shed load, etc.? How are we going to control that energy? Where is the locking points? What is the PPE that I'm going to have to don? What was the as found? What is the as left? So again, when I'm bringing the power back, I just go back to this form, and there's my sequence of re-energization. Right. Very nicely laid out. A record of your control devices. How many times has a company got embarrassed? They had an absolutely phenomenal outage, and now they're going to be bringing power back, but they're all exhausted. It's been, a strenuous set of days, and they go to re-energize only to discover that somebody left grounds in place. Yeah. So document where they're at. Now there's your checklist again of what grounds you have to collect, and where they're located. Now, this was also one of the things that Clayton introduced to adding into the form was, guys, let's not get obsessed, and put blinders on and only think about electrical.
That's right.
But what about the mechanical? Do we need to block? Do we need to relieve? There's other forms of energy. How are they going to affect the worker? Let's document what we're controlling there as well. And then obviously, let's keep a tally. Everybody who signed on to the lotto, what time they signed on, what time that they were removed. Because again, we are responsible for everybody in that plant. That's part of this lotto. So let's make sure that we're keeping tabs of where everybody's at any given time. And then, interesting, the last page I've actually found, sometimes of the most value. So I've gone into the plant. They don't have those diagrams. Well, you know what? We're going to have to walk the line. It's going to take us a little bit of time. Sorry for the delay, but the safety of my crew is paramount. The safety of your safety record here at the plant is paramount. So we're going to walk the line. I'm going to trace things out. I'm going to draw out the circuit. And then when we all understand where those sources of energy are and how we need to lock them out, then we can proceed. And again, when I look at the sequence as you work through this form, it really does become your checklist.
Right.
Did you make sure? Did you make sure? And did you make sure? Again, big fan of how this form turned out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like we shared with the team, it's a risk assessment tool. And, from an electrical safe work practices perspective, particularly, 70 is required for quite some time that you conduct your risk assessment for arc flash and shock hazards and document it, right?
And document it.
And a lot of companies fall into that trap. So I think we've probably gone a little over on time, unfortunately, but
it not by much. I mean, we're right in time.
We're good. Hey,
our takeaways.
We're not at a conference. This isn't a catch off, so we can talk as long as we want to.
Great.
Questions coming in, whatever. My point though on checklists, you guys have probably heard the saying, that which gets measured gets done. So, for me, instead of a checklist being a to-do list that you tick off, right, it's kind of like a report card, right? It's a measurement tool, right? And going through each little step creates a part of the whole, and eventually you get those steps, you get to the whole, right? So I think of a checklist like that, not as a check, right? It's
right.
You're completing parts of a whole, and when all those parts are complete, the whole is complete. So I think that, we talked about the checklist, and, people are already wanting it. So
great.
We talked about now. So Jeremy, you've given permission, right, for the list, for the checklist to go out.
Absolutely.
We haven't posted it yet, but we're going to post it online where you guys can download it. So I'm going to put a link on the chat area below if you're on LinkedIn. If you're not on LinkedIn and you're watching this, or you're watching the recording of this, just email us, training, training at protecequip.com, protecequip.com. That'll go to me and Tom, and we'll let Jeremy know that you're grabbing it as well. But we'll have it online shortly for you guys to download and use. And if you have any questions, we'll make sure we have Jeremy's contact information up so you can contact him.
Yep. And Matt, I'd also like to point out, and just kind of, I guess, real quick shout out for Power Test 2023, because we'll all be there. Yeah. But the checklist is an amazing tool, and it's really done a lot for our organization in continuing to excel in electrical safety. But even more important, or I guess critically important to the success of the checklist, is having a change management plan built out on how you're going to effectively implement it and walk your workforce through that change. Because, if it's just, hey, you guys need to start filling this form out without really walking through the why it's important, here's how you do it, take a look, let's pilot it, give me your thoughts, and doing the change together, your I guess just overall ability to see quick rewards and returns from it is going to be significantly limited, in my opinion and in my experience. Tom pointed out that the form went through 4 or 5 revisions and effort, and it was from people in the field using the form. And
but
so
the more that it went through the revision, the more input from the workers, the acceptance, the buy-in, the understanding, and then the desire to use it all began to blossom, because it wasn't something that corporate was just throwing down your throats. This was something that when they saw that they had input, they had collaboration, they bought into it, they understood it, and they adopted it.
That's right. And that's so kind of the shout out for next March. We're going to be doing a part 2 of the hazardous energy control presentation, and it's really just featuring that very thing, the change management plan. What does it look like? Who needs to be involved? How did you execute? What was your check and adjust process look like? How's it doing today? And I think that personally is just as important. So anyway, thanks for letting me talk about it today. I think we had a great conversation. It's always good to collaborate, and I look forward to many more.
It's awesome. I'm going to crank up a theme song while we're wrapping up here. So join us next month. We're going to be doing this more regularly. We're moving at the end of the month into a new facility, and we're going to have a new studio there we're building out right now. And Jeremy, next time you're back, we're going to do this probably sitting down live together in the studio instead of all on our own little laptops and stuff. So we'll be really excited to have you in the studio, and be watching for more Protec Lives. Thank you for sharing this form from Shermco. That's an industry needle mover. Like we said earlier in the presentation, we need to get better. And that's, some people in one company putting it out there for everybody else to use to move in that direction. So we thank you for that as well. And we look forward to hearing after Power Test, you coming back and maybe summarizing what you talked about there. And we can go more in depth into that as well, maybe in April.
All right. Sounds great. Take care, guys.
Tom, any last bits of genius wisdom?
No, I think I've used up my quota for the day, Matt. I'm just, again, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. And I really look forward to future Shermco Safety Corners. It's always a pleasure collaborating with you.
Great, thanks. And as always, if anybody has any questions post-show here, just email us training@protecequip.com. That'll go to me and Tom. We're happy to answer them for you. Have a good day, everybody.
Take care. Thank you.
Stay safe.